I've got something for you guys here. Before we get started, I'd like you to pass this around. These are $1 bills. One is labeled A and one is labeled B. And Ron, I will be collecting them before the end of the service.
That's probably why you marked them.
Yeah. What I'd like you to do is look them over. Some of you know I work at a credit union / it's a bank. And of course we review money for counterfeit. And what I'd like you to do is look those over and see if you can detect which one may be the counterfeit during the course of the service. Again, at the end, I'll come and pick it up.
Counterfeit, because it's still legal to mark money.
I think you drank the fourth pot, didn't you? By yourself.
I work for the Treasury.
Yeah. I may have marked them, which defaced government property indeed, but that didn't make it counterfeit, Archie. Boy, how did you get through that so many years? Anyway, so as you are finding your way to Galatians chapter 4 for our text this morning, I'd just like to open in prayer. Lord, thank you for your word to us, for us, unto us. We thank you for the work that Jesus did on the cross, and may that be in the forefront of our mind as we delve in today, Lord, the next couple of weeks here, and just really hit some hard stuff, impacting stuff, things that impact us as your children. And this morning as we discover we really are your children, and we'll see why. I ask, Lord, your blessings upon your word today, that it wouldn't go out empty, that we would, as that one member said one day when he came in and sat down, he was visiting and he said, when does the service begin? And the person said, as soon as the pastor's done. And so, Lord, may that be us today. May we walk from here and begin service unto you. In Jesus' name, amen. So, last week, while we were in Galatians chapter 3, we began, or basically touched on a theme that Paul has woven through his teaching ministry to scattered churches. And I think, Roger, it's your Bible study during the week, right, that does the follow-up. They actually go back over, I haven't attended one of these, but they go back over what today's message was, or the Sunday morning message. And so I'm going to ask you, with your team this week, to go back through as part of your homework and the review of this morning's message, and see if you can discover how many of Paul's letters had warnings to the churches that he was writing to about spiritual warfare, about deceit, and all. See if you can discover just how many of Paul's letters had warnings to the churches themselves. And then, would 1 week be enough, or do you need 2 weeks to find that out? And then you can give us a report.
1 week's fine.
1 week's fine. For the rest of us, finish reading Galatians chapter 4 if you haven't read it in advance, and Galatians chapter 5, obviously, for next week. So we see that Paul has begun a theme, if you will, a warning. But I want you to notice something that we didn't see last week. You notice he said, "Oh, empty-headed Galatians. Oh, foolish," and we saw some strong language, who has bewitched you, and that kind of stuff. And you can really springboard off of that. But one of the things I want to make sure that you saw that he didn't say, he didn't say, "Oh, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you're going to go to hell? Who has bewitched you that now you've lost your faith or you've walked away from your faith?" He didn't say any of that. He just said, notice what's happening. There are people that have crept in. He says this back in chapter 2. People have crept in. They've tried to destroy your faith. They've tried to get you caught up in the PC world, especially in the world that we live in today. But he didn't say, well, because of what you've done, you're not going to heaven. He's just warning them that they're going to be sidetracked in their walk. And so it made me question me, and it made me question you after it questioned me, and that is, how deceived are we? How is your walk? Have you really bought into the foolishness of what's going on in the world today? I want to read to you something that is in what Zodiades, the author of this, the guy who put this Bible together, he's got in the footnotes. And he's referring to chapter 2, verse 4, because Paul says, I'm writing this because there's false brethren that have crept in among you. He says, in this verse, Paul is warning the church in Galatia that there were those endeavoring to bring the Christians under the law of Moses. Although Paul circumcised Timothy, who was half Jew and half Gentile, you see that in Acts 16, he did not yield to pressure to circumcise others. Had he volunteered to do so, then that would have been acceptable. But Judaizers were teaching that Christians should be under obligation to keep the law. Paul calls them a Greek name, which is translated false brethren. These people had infiltrated the church secretly. I thought that was profound, because you notice that these people had come into the church, said, "Hey brother, how are you?" And they had all the Christianese, but you're really not saved. You need to follow under the law, and then you have this like complete salvation. You've got the work that Jesus did on the cross, plus you've got the law. And they were causing people to believe that. They were being deceived. Excuse me, but that is the devil's plan. I'm just cutting to the chase on this one. He's been doing that since day one. How many times have I quoted, what's that one verse I quote all the time where it always started? Genesis 3:15, where Satan says, "Did he really say?" You've got to know that. This has got to be the foundation of your faith, because everything that you get challenged by is, did he really say? Did he really say that you were going to blah, 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 blah? And as soon as it casts that little bit of doubt, from that point on, you're always going, well, I'm not so sure. And in today's world, we have to soften it up with making sure that we don't offend anybody with our beliefs. And I'm telling you, when we take this straight from the Word, you got to stand by it. You have to stand on it and not worry about what the world's going to say to you. Now, I'm going to quote to you this often quoted religious guy. His name is Tim Allen. And he plays a role on Last Man Standing, which now they've canceled that show, which I thought was so good. Have you guys watched that? Mike Baxter. I quoted him verbatim one day because I couldn't believe what he said because it was so cool. He said, we need to worry less about who we are offending and concern more with who we're inspiring. And I've taken that to heart. I'm getting so dang tired of this world. Getting so tired of this. You just used this word? Well, that's offensive. This morning, I saw where the U.S. Army had mentioned that they've come out with this new piece of armor. And it's kind of like the old days where if you have a piece of metal like your car and you have a dent in it, sometimes they call that a chink in the armor, right? You've heard of that? How many of you are offended by that? Because we know that it means that there's a ding in your armor. Already they had to backpedal because they thought that someone was complaining because they thought that was racist. And you're going, what? So see, we have to be so careful anymore about what we say that it's become almost shameful. But I'm telling you, you and me and us that are here, those watching, we need to be able to make a stand in this day and not knuckle under to that. But there may be a cost. There may be a cost to that. And maybe that's what we're afraid of. I may have to suffer for it. I may have to pay for it. But I'm telling you that there's a point here in which the church is being slowly but surely driven underground. I've heard this 20, 30 years ago, and I didn't believe it. I didn't believe that the church was actually going to be so made so ugly in society that now it's going to have to go underground. There's going to be a time where somebody's going to be out here protesting that we're in here, probably offending them somehow by being here, and that eventually we may just be scattered and back into the home Bible studies and not be able to meet in a format like this. It's coming. I fought it for many years thinking, no, it can't be, this is America. But this is what's happening to America. But it isn't new. So as Paul continues on here, in this little footnote here, these people had infiltrated the church secretly without declaring from the start who they were or what they intended to do. This does not indicate that they were brought in by the church itself, but that they managed to deceive them, the people in the fellowship, to enter the fellowship. Paul calls these intruders false brethren. It's the same term that he uses in 2 Corinthians 11, speaking of himself being, quote, in dangers among false brethren. He picked up on it. He recognized it. And I want to encourage you to say you need to have your spiritual antennas up and say, am I being deceived? Am I being misled? Is this political correct culture pulling me down away from the foundation of my faith? This is a tough question. I actually had a joke I was going to start with, and I thought, you know what, I can't go from a joke to something heavy like this, so I'll save the joke for next week. Anyway, Ed's not here. I was going to pick on him. So these are basically, so even in 1 Peter, Peter writes, he says, see, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about, seeking whom he can devour. And he wants to devour you, and me. Because the whole, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is coming up. In that, while today's message is going to be a bit scary, maybe surreal, maybe you may not feel like it's true, or maybe even sci-fi, because there's all sorts of strange things going on in our lives. We find out that we are, and this is the title of the message that I told Nick to put down, newsflash, we're at war. And so many times the church has been so lulled into such a, everything is just the way it's been, and isn't this, God bless you, and, kumbaya, and all this. And yet there's a war going on, and we're getting sucked up into it, being deceived that there isn't a war. But we are, and we need to know that, and we need to be prepared for that war. But we need to know that the war is going on in order for us to prepare for it. And it's a mortal combat. I know it sounds strong. It's mortal combat going on all around us. It's a diabolical warfare, one commentator put it. It's a diabolical warfare in America. It's a war against light and darkness, good and evil, heaven and hell, Christ and Satan, and you are a part of that war. You can't afford to be ignorant or neutral. And those are pretty tough words, because sometimes I find myself, am I being ignorant? Am I being neutral? But a lot of times I don't find myself being aggressive, assertive for my walk and for my faith. And sometimes I just say, I'm in, and the rest of the world could go to hell as far as I care, type of thing. And that's not just a slight thing to say. One of the things we have to recognize, and I've brought this up a number of times, is that this spiritual warfare, like I mentioned last week, we're in this tug-of-war thing. And you'll see why in the first few verses of Galatians 4 that we're going to look at. And that is because when we received Christ, when we accepted Him as our Lord and Savior, we became heirs to the throne. Do you believe? Let's look in Galatians here, chapter 4. Actually, let's go back up 2 verses to verse 28 of 3. He says, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ. Do you agree? And if you be Christ's, then are you Abraham's seed, and heirs according to the promise. Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differs nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all. And you know what, I encourage you, do some homework on this and dig in, read the Greek or some commentaries or whatever, because the King James gets a little clunky. But, verse 2, but is under tutors and governors, and at the time appointed of the Father, even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. Which I think the church can find itself back under bondage again, under the elements, and we'll see what that means again in a moment. He picks up and says this very same thing in Colossians 2. But when the fullness of verse 4. But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of His Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. We probably have heard that 1,000 times in our lives, right? And probably even can repeat it because we've memorized it. But does it stick home to you? Does it bring a point to you to say, wait a minute? Paul says, God sent His Son in the form of Jesus, died on the cross, was buried, rose again, which is what we call the gospel. Very good. You guys are catching on. And he says, as a result of that, when you received that, became born again, you now became grafted into the family of God. You are God's kids. Sometimes we walk around saying, oh, woe is me. You know, remember Eeyore? And say, boy, this is a wonderful day. And say, oh, so you got the joy of the Lord in you. Yep. You know why? Because we get beat down. We really do. You know, walking in the Spirit, recognizing that we have this glorious eternity that we're headed to. Remember I talked about the dash? I was born in 1951. There's this dash, and I'm going to die in 20-something. And I'm going to be accountable for that dash. I'm going to be accountable for what did you do, especially after you received Christ. What did you do in the name of Christ? Because that's your assignment. Our assignment isn't to have a 16-bedroom home with 4 pools and a 9-car garage and all that. That's not it, because God's made a mansion for us in heaven. We're not taking this stuff with us. It's one of those things where we've got to get that point across. We're here to be about the work of the Lord. I want Him to be able to put His arm around me when I enter His presence and say, well done, my good and faithful servant. Boy, you sure screwed up a couple of times. But other than that, you did some good things. Because I know there's going to be that bema seat of Christ chiding that I'm going to get. Okay, I'll deserve it. But in the meantime, we have to focus on the fact, why are we here? I love the word that he says when Paul is challenging them about, oh foolish Galatians, who has so easily bewitched you? And the word is who? Who did this to you? And you may say, well, my dad wasn't a very good dad, and I blame my dad. Or my mom is an alcoholic and all that. You know what? Both of my parents were alcoholics. I can't blame them for how I turned out. I can't blame them at all. Oh, there might be, some 4-volume set of psychology books or something that says, yes, you can blame your parents. But I don't buy into that. Not again as a born-again believer either. I've got a new life. I've put on new clothes, a new person. And I am me now. And I used to blame my dad. My dad was a retired Army sergeant. He made me do this and that and other. You know what? He made me make my bed. I know. And that's why I'm a criminal today. So, we are responsible for our own selves, for our own walk, and for the job that God has called us to do. I'm really excited about this upcoming trip in September because everybody that's in the receiving end, both at Calvary Chapel in Geneva, Lyon, and Paris, are all expecting to connect with you. That's my whole goal, is to connect Calvary Chapel Newburgh to those missionaries and ministries there, that what I can begin, you guys can finish over there. You with me on that? This is because I'm so excited to see the love in your eyes, the love that's overflowing in your heart, your desire to want to see the word get out. And that is an area that deeply needs it. And so I'm going there as a representative of you guys, because I don't know what's going to happen to me afterwards. When John takes over, I don't know. No, man, I just revealed a little bit more about myself. Oh, that's too... Anyway, I am so excited to be a part of this fellowship. But I also want to make sure that you recognize that the battle is raging today. Newsflash. We're at war. Mortal combat. And it's a spiritual war. And as simply as I can put it, the battle is between the forces of, indeed, good, God's legions, versus Lucifer and his legions. A lot of people want to play that down, water it down, go, oh, that's too strong, Mark. But we're caught in the crossfire of that. And we're wanted as hostages. In this room, this very minute, I don't know when the last time you thought about this, but there are angels in this room. Now you can't see them, I know. but they are here on your behalf, our behalf, engaged in a spiritual warfare. It has to be spiritual warfare. But he's trying to influence us in our physical walk, in our physical world. But the ones that are on our side are battling on our behalf against the angels, if you will, of evil. And what do you think are the spoils of this war? Yeah, absolutely. Us. To the victor goes the spoils. You've heard that, right? That's a war-ism. What they're wanting is the spoils of this war are you and me. And to get back at God. And you say, get back at God. By the way, the devil's not only, after you and me, he's after our kids and their kids. You've got to be alert to that. But what is the root of this battle? Why are we at war? When did this all start? Well, we got back to, we talk about Genesis 3:15 a lot. But actually, if you're going to do some homework, look up Isaiah. Isaiah 14:12 through 17. You've heard this before. It's called the 5 I wills, right? Where Lucifer says, I will be like the God Most High. I will, I will, I will, I will. And he gets the swift boot. So here's this worship leader, this good-looking, so they say, son of the morning. He's now known as Satan. I mentioned earlier that we were in this diabolical warfare. Do you know what diabolical means? What's the root of that? Say again? Diablo. What does that mean? Diabolical warfare is, the word comes from the root, diablos, which is also Greek for, you hear this in so many different languages, but also the Greek for the devil. So we're in this devilish warfare. And I thought of something, we know that Lucifer was a fallen angel, archangel. Apparently he had a beautiful voice, he was good looking, son of the morning, that type of thing. But one of the things I found interesting is that do you ever hear anybody name their son Lucifer? It's like, hey Lucifer, take out the trash. Or how about Judas, for that matter? Hey Judas, did you make your bed this morning? Yeah. Nobody names their kids Judas. They want to tell you the Bible isn't real. They don't really care about that. You think that you're in some fable because you believe in Jesus. But ask them if they've named their kid Lucifer. So as far, or how about Judas? Everybody knows about Judas. They don't believe the Bible. They don't believe Jesus, but they sure know Judas sold them out. So it's very interesting. Now, since if we go through our GEPCO series, Galatians, Ephesians, and all, we're probably not going to be able to get to Galatians 6. Pardon me just a second while I'm here. But we all know the classic Ephesians 6 and putting on the armor of God, right? As I was thinking of this message, I wanted to get deeper into that simply because you guys, this isn't first grade. I don't need to bring a first grade message to college students. Every conversation I've had with you guys are pretty well advanced in your knowledge of the Word. I have no doubt of that. So I want to make sure that we do something that's a little bit more in depth, of more than just putting on the helmet and the breastplate of righteousness, because we all know that. But I want to go in a little deeper into what those mean and why, since we're in this particular warfare. So in Ephesians 6:11 it says, therefore put on the whole armor of God, we know that you might be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. By the way, whose armor is it? Yeah, notice something. It isn't ours. It's not like you go walk into the closet and go, which shield should I use today? No, I don't like this one. I wore that one last week. It's not ours. It's not even, it's God's provided it for us. So that's the first thing that we need to recognize, is that this is an armor of God. And this is to wear in a war against spiritual elements. So you need spiritual articles of warfare to withstand the attacks. But we hear about the wiles. Anybody know what the origination of the word wiles is? The wiles of the devil. You wily devil, you. Pardon me? Oh, very good. It's methodia in the Greek, which happens to be, Zach, cunning arts, deceit, craft, and trickery. Those are the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, 6:12, but against principalities, we know that, against powers, we know that, the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. But as I like to do, I like to take each one of those words and break it down into what the Greek word is and the definition of it, and then rebuild the sentence again and see what the power of that is, because we've gotten so glossed over. I know, yeah, Ephesians 6:12, I memorized it in school, got a candy bar, and went away. So now it's like, wait a minute, we need to review that again and say, what is the power in that verse itself? So we pick up the first Greek word that has meaning to it, principalities, which is the Greek word arche, which is the first person or thing in a series, like an archangel, that type of thing. In Ephesians 1:21 we read, "For above all principality and power and might and dominion, and every name that is named, not only in this world, but also that in, which is to come," and so on. You can just do a word study on the word principalities as you go through the word, and you find, there's something more to the word about principalities that is and should be important to me. And then the word powers, exousia. I know you guys pronounce it. You practice that word every day, right, as you're driving along. That means the leading and more powerful among created beings, superior to man. Spiritual potentates. Did you realize that? That all these powers, what does the word powers mean? It means spiritual potentates, these people that are in power in the dark spiritual world. That's who we're battling against. Oh yeah, there are political parties that we're battling against, and there's the Antifa group and all these things in the fleshly world. But he says we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We do wrestle against them in the physical world, but they're not the ones that can distract you from your walk. They're not the ones that could cause you to trip and stumble as much as these powers from the dark world. I know, see, I told you it was going to sound a little spooky when we start getting into the spiritual realm, but we can't avoid it. It's real. And the Bible's explicit about it. It's clear. We can understand that. Another word that he uses in here, the principles of, the darkness, the rulers of the darkness. And this one really got to me when I looked up the Greek word. Cosmocrator. It almost looks like it's a Russian word when you look at it. But it means the Lord of the world, the prince of this age, for example, meaning the devil and his demons. That's very real. They are trying to win you back over. You've become a Christian, you believe in the work of Christ by faith. You believe by faith and you were saved by grace, which is not of your own, of course, and we know that Ephesians verse. But this is where the battle is. This is what it is that we're trying to overcome all the time. And then he goes on and he says, the rulers of darkness. Now, we get confused sometimes because the English word says, and the rulers of the darkness, but this isn't darkness as in, well, I just turned out the lights. It's a dark spiritual side. And one commentator put, and the accompanying ungodliness and immorality together with their consequent misery in hell. See, this is no light stuff. Is that a pun on darkness? This is no light. I'm sorry. Somebody laughed. Thank you. And then he continues ends that with darkness of the world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, poneria, which means depravity. So against the spiritual depravity in high places. So if you go back and reassemble all that. Oh, interesting, when he mentions of the world, he doesn't use cosmos. We're so used to the world. If you read in John, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, the world in that sense is cosmos, the entire world. But here he uses the word aeon, A-I-O-N, which means an era of time, a period of time of this dimension. So this is why I so encourage you to become students of the Bible, that you would go in and find yourself some of these Greek interlinears, where you can go back and say, what is the real meaning of this word? Not that King James and his boys didn't do it right, but that English just doesn't seem to have the impact that Greek has. And when you go back in and you discover some of these words, you just say, wow, I didn't realize that that really had that much power to the verse. Meaning it's more impactful, meaning that it's more something that I need to apply to my life more and recognize this. Here's a good example. Well, what does all this mean? So I go back to the idea that this room is filled with angelic beings, both dark, evil side, and the light, heavenly side. There are two places that I'd like you to do your homework on this week. 2 Kings chapter 6. Now we know this story because Elisha, the king of Syria, was sending his troops out to battle. But he'd send them out to battle and they were being confronted with a resistant force. And they weren't so easily winning. And so the king of Syria discovers that there's a spy, there's a mole, somebody is getting the word out to the Hebrews that they're coming up to battle with, because they're prepared. So someone in the king's court, the king of Syria, says, yeah, there's this fella named Elisha who happens to be the mole. Somehow he's getting information. The Bible tells us that God's kind of slipping him a little info here and there. And he gets the word out before the battles. So when the king of Syria's forces gets there, they're ready for battle and they lose. And the king of Syria is getting pretty ticked. They said, find out who he is. So somebody says, hey, we found out it's Elisha, and he's off in Dothan right now. And the king says, go get him. All right. So all these Syrian troops mount up, they get on their horses. They ride out to Dothan, where Elisha and his servant, guy's waiting on him, is. The servant goes out, gets a bucket of water, and he goes, oh my gosh, it's as if the whole Syrian army was there, because it was. And so he goes running back in and he says, Elisha, we're dead meat. The whole Syrian army is out here. And they've got us encircled. And Elisha knows what it is that you and I know today. And he says, wait a minute, you don't see the full picture. What do you mean? And he prays instantly. And he says, Lord, would you open my servant's eyes that he might see what's going on? And spiritually, his eyes are open. And there's about, 27,000 million angels. And they're all going, all encamped around the Syrians, And Elisha says, piece of cake. Because there's the spiritual warfare part, the part that you and I don't see as often. Or how about in Daniel? Here's another part to go look up. In Daniel 10. When I look at these things, I should put my glasses on. Daniel 10. Where Daniel's in prayer, and he had made a request unto the Lord. And he doesn't hear back. But later on, he's in prayer again, and all of a sudden an angel shows up, and he says, hey, Daniel, I just want you to know that God has heard your prayer. He heard it the moment you requested it. And he sent me back with the answer right away to give to you. But I've spent the last 21 days dealing with the Prince of Persia, another name for the devil, who resisted me. And so there it is, another indication of the fact that there is this spiritual realm that you and I seem to forget or let go by because we don't live in it, we don't see it that frequent. But we need to know, we've got examples for us to recognize that it is real. And we can't forget about that. We have to recognize that you and I, there's always this debate, do we have guardian angels? And I suggest, yes, we do. And mine is going to retire on full retirement when I'm done. I'm sure he's gone to God. Can I have someone else? Well, in the interest of time, we're going to shorten this up here. How does Satan do battle? Well, his strategies are to trip us up through lies and through deceit, misdirection, misinformation, and so on. And that's been his strategy for thousands of years, because Lucifer has known his fate. But his goal has been to destroy the goal of God's. And that is, he wants to interrupt the plans. You can read through the Bible and all the attempts that Satan has tried to corrupt bloodlines or somehow get in the way to thwart the plan of God's salvation, even including the cross. But Satan is not through with us either. If you want to do some more background work, look up Colossians 2:8. Where Paul says not to follow by the philosophy, the rudiments of the world. Well, look, Paul was a philosopher himself, so he had no problems with philosophy per se, but he was condemning teaching that was crediting humans or humanity for things and not Christ. Oh, this is human cause, this is man cause, this is because of you. And it was not giving any, the philosophy of the world wasn't giving Christ the credit. And he also says, don't follow the vain deceits. Vain. What does vain mean? Vain means absolutely, completely empty. Vanity, vanity. Everything is vanity, Solomon said. Everything is empty, right? Oh, I was going to say something, but I won't. Yeah, because I'm not saying it to keep me from trouble. So, having no real value, empty, worthless, idle, without force or effect. Indeed, the world and its false teachings have no meat, no spiritual value in this spiritual warfare that's being waged. What the world does teach us is pridefulness, self-centeredness. But Jesus himself says, "For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect." And he also warns us about following the traditions of men. Now I know that he's not saying tradition is every Thanksgiving we watch football. I mean, I do, and that is tradition. But he's speaking more of the customs and rituals and the political correctness the world is leading us to. Paul's warning about the influence that the world has on your behaviors and on your decisions. Why? Because the evil spiritual forces that are driving natural man, and it's important that we recognize and that we resist that temptation to be driven by things like, what kind of car does that person drive? Oh, he must be successful. Oh, look at it. And everything you discover is being measured by things of this earth. Now, I know we don't put notches in our Bibles. I think I've run across some guys who have, so I have to correct myself. But yeah, theoretically, we're not supposed to, right? Because God does the saving. We just sort of do the leading. But I do want to say this, that if we were allowed to do that, I would like to know that my Bible was really pretty well scarred up with notches, saying that basically my goal was, my task was to lead people to Christ. Christ does the saving. And then when I get into heaven, I read, those are the rewards that I've been sending ahead, that Jesus said, to send ahead the treasures in heaven. And so may your focus be that. May you recognize that we're in a spiritual warfare. Newsflash, we're at war. Been at war for a while. Some of us didn't recognize it until just now or recently. And something that I thought fit so well for today. Let me finish this last part here because I missed one. When we're talking about like the car we drive and the house we have, those are traditions. But there's also one last thing he points out in Colossians 2:8, the rudiments of this world, the basic fundamentals, the science of first principles of humankind. And so how is Satan's battle strategy working? Again, we say Genesis 3:1, did God really say? As soon as he creates doubt or confusion in your mind, he's winning. did Christ really, we try to complicate death, burial, and resurrection and add so much other stuff. But as soon as I can create any kind of doubt, one of the best strategies of Satan is saying, just lie to him. There was a thing I heard recently. In World War II, Japanese civilians were told to be very careful and be very aware of U.S. Army officers. I go, why? Because they told them that to become a U.S. Army officer, the officer had killed his mother. Now you and I go, that's preposterous. That's not true. But the people in Japan who had been being lied to thought that that was the truth. And so they lived with that being the truth. So with that, I say, how many times do you challenge something that you hear? How many times are you going to challenge what you heard here today? By doing your own study. By saying, I want to see, just how right is Mark? How accurate is the Greek words he was just looking at? Because you have to know that my career in the military had to do with my rating. I was in electronics, they call it avionics, aviation electronics. My specific duties were called DECM. The D stands for Deceptive Electronic Countermeasures. I've lived the deception life. So now you're going to kick me out. What I worked on was, I asked Ed once if we had a whiteboard here. I wanted to draw something for you because it's become so declassified. But I wanted to show you how DECM works, Deceptive Electronic Countermeasures. And real briefly, we would fly in over enemy territory. They'd have a surface-to-air or AAA anti-aircraft artillery radar, fire control radar, would be illuminating our aircraft. As radar works, hits the plane, bounces back, and it tells the operator on the ground, the North Vietnamese, that where we are. Altitude, heights, azimuth, distance, the whole bit. So that they could zero in on our plane and launch a SAM, a surface-to-air missile. Kick in our gear. Our gear, very simply, would absorb that radar signal, and before it had a chance to bounce back, would be bounced back, but overridden by our own equipment. So it would be stronger, bolder than the one that came in, and 300 yards behind us. So it was deceiving the missile, and the missile would go whoop, like this. So when they launched it, it would blow up 300 yards behind us, and it's no harm, no foul. So we would deceive the enemy fire control radar. And if you ever want to hear these war stories, I'd love to tell them because they countered. So then they would counter our ECM, and then we would counter, and we were all twisted. And so it was an interesting career, to be sure, deceiving and defeating enemy missiles and fire control radar and stuff like that. A lot of it was really fun. I love to draw it because it's more visual to see it that way, but we don't have the chance. Anyway, so I was being interviewed for a job to direct a board for a Christian ministry. And do you realize that they really went to town? They spent probably 20 minutes on the fact that I knew how to professionally deceive. Serious. That when I was in the Navy, my naval aviation career was that of deception, and we don't want you. So they didn't say it as much, like that. But anyway, so we know that there's a war going on in the heavenlies. But since we don't have time, we're running out of time, I want to encourage you to continue to read the counter. And you think you know it. You think you know the full armor of God that He's given you, the belt of truth. Do you know the first casualty in war is what? Truth. That's the first casualty. I think it's interesting that the first thing he mentions is the belt of truth. The soldier was able to, in those days, cinch up his tunic, feel the freedom to move in battle. William Barclay writes, others may guess and grope, but the Christian moves freely and quickly, because in any situation, he knows the truth. You with me? The first casualty of war is truth, but you guys know the truth. You shouldn't be casualties. Don't let this stuff come around. As a matter of fact, has the money made it all the way through? There's 2. Ron. Yeah, Ed left. Wait a minute. Oh, you have all 4? Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, got him. So, here's the thing. Who thinks that A is the counterfeit? There's a few. Who thinks that B is? Just a few of you, huh? Did you look at this? Too bad. So, I'm afraid to tell you, but I've lived up to my word. I just deceived you all, because neither one of them are counterfeit. All I did was suggest to you that maybe one of them might have been counterfeit, and you went for it. See, and that's the other thing, Craig. Nobody counterfeits. I think the most counterfeited bill is 100, but nobody counterfeits one, you know. So that should have tipped you off. But anyway, the whole point is here you are, bright and bushy-tailed, ready to go to Sunday morning meeting, and you got deceived right off the bat. So I guess I'm not coming back. See how easy it was, though? Just the power of suggestion. And so we need to be on our toes all the time, saying, is this a suggestion? Lord, what is going on here? So the last thing I wanted to point out to you is I have a Facebook friend who this week posted something that I thought was pretty profound. And I wanted to, she lives up in BC, Canada. And she showed us on there something very interesting. Matthew 10:22, Matthew 24:9, Luke 21, and Mark 13, where Jesus himself says that the church is going to be pushed or forced to go underground because we are going to be hated. Do you feel any kind of sense of being hated anymore as a church? You know, one of the points that she was making out was pointing out, you know, is that, you know, park benches because they may have the word God on it, or you know, I just saw this last week, that one more try to get In God We Trust off our money got shot down again. And I was watching yesterday the commissioning of the Gerald Ford, the new aircraft carrier, and I was so proud. Almost every one of them, the CNO, the Chief of Naval Operations, the captain of the ship, there was an invocation and a benediction by a chaplain. There was everything that every single dignitary, the Department of Defense, the president, anybody and everybody got up there and spoke, said, "God bless America, God bless the Navy in this ship and all who ride on it," and all that. You know, you've got all these people screaming in the streets, and here all these dignitaries all asked God to bless this warship. I love it because one of the men came up there and the Chief of Naval Operations. How can they get, I mean, I was in the Navy for a long time, but how come that guy only looks like 21? How did he become the Chief of Naval Operations and he's just out of high school? It's an amazing thing. But he says that, he says, "Welcome to the 100,000-ton Made in America war machine." It was so cool. I mean, bubble busting, you know, just great pride because they were invoking God in through the whole thing. So may we be as bold. May we be able to say, hey, not in my place, not at this time, however that goes, you know. You're not going to put down my faith. That we may make a stand. Now I know there's this other thing called martyr. Being able to make a stand could make a martyr out of you or me. But depends on how much fear we have. Because greater is he who is in you than, you know the verse. Do you believe it? And do you believe that you believe what you believe? Let's pray. Well, Lord, this is sort of a confrontive message, if you will, to be sure, to confront us and our faith, that we might recognize the spiritual warfare that is going on, the battles, and Lord, just how easily we could be deceived through people who have worked their way in to the fellowship, into our lives, into the church, and Lord, challenging our faith. So Lord, I ask that you would show us, open our spiritual eyes and ears, that we might hear, that we might see the mighty work that you are doing and that you have called us to. And may we continue to be about that, Lord. May we just ignite this valley here, Lord, starting with this little fellowship that you've put together over here in the corner of Newburgh. But Lord, just roll over this town, this valley, this county, wherever you're, just no stopping as a result of you lighting a fire in us to be about your business. Thank you for your word. And now, Lord, may we perform it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, God bless you and keep you, and may He genuinely make His face shine upon you this week. May you walk around with that glow that Moses had that didn't go away for so long, because it was a godly glow that was on his face that just, well, and may it never fade as it did with Moses. God bless you this week.